was really fascinating for me when we had that initial conversation a few months back was myself and David often, we're from a kind of corporate background, working for the same company, and we often have conversations with people about the kind of mindset coaching, about the things like self-limiting beliefs, where provided you can face up to your self-limiting beliefs and overcome them, you can do great things you never thought you were capable of. But what kind of drew me to what you were talking about was actually, you're going beyond that, really. It's the kind of physiological, neurological, biological ways in which you can help yourself kind of do different things and feel healthier. And it was different to a lot of the coaches that I'd certainly come across, and probably Dave, that you'd come across in your career, and also in running your own consultancy.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting, isn't it? It's I was thinking as Peter was talking that the kind of the comparisons between the corporate organism and the human organism, and the proactive way of managing it or the reactive way of managing it. And you will remember, Dave, a lot of the time corporations tend to be reactive, particularly if they're product sellers or product places or financial providers or whatever. They tend to react to the market. And there's an interesting correlation, I think, there between the two, in the sense of it's probably a lot, well, it is a lot better to be proactive and to think ahead, but there seems to be an inertia about it, both in individuals, and whether it comes down to that, I don't want to think that I'm ill, because I certainly encountered that prior to my diagnosis with Parkinson's. I went through the entire bloke's routine of taking about 18 months to go to the doctors about it. And it's, I think, the same with corporations in a sense. It's almost like we don't want to pretend, or we don't want to admit we might have something wrong in case the stakeholders or shareholders are offended or whatever. So it's kind of an interesting correlation between the two types of body, I suppose. But I certainly got first-hand experience of that frightened to be proactive thing, and I think that's probably quite common, I would imagine, with human beings, that kind of fear of looking things in the face and saying, yeah, I do have a problem.
I think it's a really good analogy, actually, David, and not one that I'd actually kind of recognized before. But I mean, the analogy, and it's true in the health service as a whole, that we only have to look at this last year, 18 months, in terms of how the NHS has adapted to deal with the pandemic, in terms of working practices and changing routines and rotas. And it's been a real example as to how change can happen really quickly in the NHS when there's a crisis.
Yeah.
But if there isn't a crisis, then actually change is really difficult in most organisations, and the NHS is no different to that. We've been experiencing a pandemic of metabolic ill health in terms of obesity, diabetes, heart disease for 20, 30 years, yet haven't really been able to get to grips with it in the same way that we've been able to get to grips with the pandemic and roll out this incredible, vaccination program that's swept the UK. So, and I think as individuals, it's the same. We get very comfortable, and when something challenges the status quo, actually, we don't really want to hear it, see it, because if we don't hear it and see it, it's probably not going to happen. It's not true. Maybe it's not true. And therefore we wait until we've had the heart attack, or till a loved one gets diagnosed with cancer, and we get that wake-up call to say, oh lordy, that could have been a lot worse, or it could have been me. Maybe I need to do something about it. I mean, and even then, not a lot of people don't do something about it.
No, it's strange, isn't it? We have a I think it's the fight-flight reaction, isn't it? If change is inherently frightening to people, so we react with the old amygdala going off and saying, I'm either going to run from it, hide from it, or just pretend it's not there. And they tend to be the three reactions. And I think within corporate life, you see that as well. I mean, Dave and I have been on many a project that's been reactive to something. There's been a legislation change, or perhaps a data breach in another company, and every other company in the universe suddenly has to make these changes, which we'd probably been saying we need to make these changes like for 10 years. But it's not until it kind of turns around and bites you that a lot of big companies will do it. I saw a fantastic little I suppose that what they call memes or something on LinkedIn, you know, one of these little sayings, and it was, who was responsible for your IT infrastructure rebuild this year? Was it your CEO, your CIO, or COVID-19? and that sort of sums up the industry reaction. There has been a crisis. We must do something about it, rather than actually thinking, well, what might happen? You know, and I think it strikes us at both company and individual levels, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's reminded me, Dave, just as you were speaking, that we had a project sponsor once who, when I was project manager and program manager, he was really concerned that the project was red. So, you know, it's not kind of rocket science. It's a red, amber, green project rate, and if it's red, it means it's in danger of not delivering, or it's going to cost more than you expected it would cost. And you know, I explained to him why it was red, and how we were pushing really hard to reach the date. And the date was really ambitious. And that's why it was red, and it would always be red until we crossed the finish line. And then he started asking all his projects then why they weren't red. So because if they're not red, you're not trying hard enough. And he used to walk into the room and say, "Where's the crisis?" And he was a fairly senior guy, and everybody used to say, "Well, there isn't a crisis," and they'd spend all their time explaining to him how everything was under control. And he said, "Well, if there isn't a crisis, we've got to create one now." He said, "Because that's the only way things get done. Create the crisis now."
Except a lot of the time, crisis management isn't an organisation's strongest
not at all
strength, is it really?
And in terms of health, it's not, you know, it's not a strategy for long-term health either, really.
No,